Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, I'll be doing kind of a podcast style content piece and kind of talk about the history of Katsu, how Katsu used to be in my perception, and kind of how certain cards changed that, play style. And now that we have the bonds restriction, how can we potentially get back to in what my opinion made Katsu a very difficult hero to deal with, and we'll kind of talk about different things as we go on. So if you want a full stop shop content piece on like maybe how to wrap your head around how to play Katsu right now, hopefully this content piece helps you with that. But if you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoy your stay. If you're a long-staying supporter, thank you so much as always. Feel free to check out the Discord down below, channel membership, all that good stuff. This will be a little bit longer of a video, not insanely long, but longer than my 10-minute normal spiels, and kind of just give you a little background on Katsu and where my head is at. So when I first joined the game, I joined back right at the start of Monarch is where I joined. And I know in Welcome to Wraith, Katsu was very like Turtle Katsu-like, right? And then we got to Monarch and it became like this mid-rangey, sometimes control, but more mid-rangey deck that really punished the opponent in the mid to late game once they wore him down a little bit. And then as time went on, the deck has just gotten faster and faster and faster. What I think made Katsu originally so strong, and what honestly drew me to the hero, and we'll talk about this when I show some other cards here in a second, is the mind game aspect of Katsu, right? I think the one thing in Flesh and Blood, and I'm gonna get a little bit conceptual here, so hopefully y'all stay with me on this one. Flesh and Blood's such a numbers game. It's so almost like chess driven, right? Like the best numbers win. And I think more times than not, that's correct, right? I'm not going to sit here and argue that and say you should always play it at efficiency. But there is a merit to building a deck or playing a deck that, while it may not be as efficient, it makes up for value in what it forces your opponent to do. The most drastic version of this is New. Right now, New does it through just sheer disruption, right? However, even though her numbers are actually very, very poor in comparison to other decks, unless she has like insane reaction, just luck of the draw, she makes up for it by what she forces you to do. She forces you to play her game. And I think Katsu honestly used to be like that. A really good Katsu player back in the day, in the Monarch time frame especially, and even when I was playing in the Chain and Starvo time frame for some brave souls who were playing Katsu during that time, excuse me, you would play a really good Katsu player and like they would just throw something different at you every turn. And one of the hardest things about Katsu and pre-Bonds of Ancestry is one turn you would see the surging line and you're like, okay, do they have whelming? Do they not? You have to make that decision point. Then the next turn you'd see Kadachi leg tap and you're like, okay, well, do they have rising? Do they not have rising? Then next turn you might see, they might block with a card and then they have 3 cards left and they Kadachi Soul Beat Strike, and you're like, okay, if I let this hit, it's going to have Mask Momentum. Do they have Razor Reflex? Do they not have Razor Reflex? Should I block this out fully? Should I overblock? A good Katsu would present a different decision point, a truly different decision point every single turn, nearly every single turn. Now, there were some consistency issues with Katsu back in the day, still is a little bit now, and that's just kind of like what the hero does sometimes. But overall, you would get this intrinsic value because you would force your opponent to just make such like bad decisions sometimes, or just like not efficient decisions, because they had to play around cards like Mask Momentum, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then, as time went on, and I'll bring these 2 cards up here, or before I bring those 2 cards up, we got ninjas like Phi and Zen, which in my opinion took away from what Ninja did, which was just force that decision on the opponent, right? It just became a numbers game with those 2 decks, and it kind of took away my love for Ninja with those 2 decks. I didn't like playing Phi. I don't like playing Zen. Every time I play a game on Zen, I try to go back to it, and I'm like, this deck's just not fun. Like, if you want to win, sure, but like if you want to like enjoy the class, I would never recommend Zen to a player because it just takes away from it. So, once Bonds of Ancestry came out, it started to become more of just a straight numbers game. Now, Bonds increased the consistency of Katsu tenfold, right? We have a 3-block breakpoint that tutors us another card. So on turns where we can get a Bonds of Ancestry combo off, or basically going and getting 2 cards, which is really, really nice. And then you do those crazy loop turns, right? A little bit more consistent than a card like McGinty Release, right? Or the traditional surging line with Lord of Wind. Whereas with McGinty Release, you're kind of playing for that mid to late game and really, try to do some type of sequence where your opponent blocks early in the chain and then you punish them later with McGinty, which we still see from time to time. But what Bonds did is it added a strength to Katsu that Katsu did not have, which was just crazy combo potential. And it also added a numbers aspect to the deck. So I'm not saying it made the deck worse, because we all know it didn't. But it took away, in my opinion, what makes Katsu from a how do I put this, gamemanship perspective, what makes Katsu so strong, which is like forcing your opponent to make a decision. And players in Flesh and Blood have gotten so much better, obviously, year after year. But there's something to be said from the mental aspect of making your opponent make that decision, of making them interact with you, of making them go through that mental state of what should I do every single turn. And eventually, if you're playing a 7-round calling, 9-round or longer than that, 7-round battle harden or 9+ round calling, and you're in round 8 and you're on stream, you're going to make that mistake, right? Like I always hear people say Katsu, it's like, oh, when you play great players, they won't make those mistakes. I'm not going to name names, but like I've played really good players who've like won callings, players who've top 8'd, and yes, their mistakes are fewer in between, but they still make those mistakes. So all I have to say, with the bonds restriction, it's allowing me to go back and play Katsu the way I believe makes the hero most powerful. Being able to present different play lines to your opponent through different combo lines and different ways of doing things every single turn. Being able to utilize your Kodachis to start to establish blocking patterns with your opponent, right? Does your opponent always block that second Kodachi? Or do they always take 2 and wait? And depending on the hero you're playing, like a Bravo, they might like always take those first 2. So now you have a chance to blow them out with a Razor or what have you, right? It's a random example, but you're able to like observe your opponent's blocking tendencies, give them different play lines to make them make a mistake, punish them later in the chain, force cards out of their hand after you've already dealt a little bit of trickle damage, and eventually once you wear down their armor, you really can make them pay. All those things really allows you to, I think that all what I just mentioned sort of went away with Katsu when Bonds was like a 6 or a 9. It was basically Kano. The deck's literally a blocking version of Kano when it was Bonds of Ancestry. Then we had cards like Mask of Momentum versus Mask of Pouncing Lynx. Mask of Momentum is my favorite card in the game. It'll always be my favorite card in the game. It's what got me in love with Ninja. It's the first major card I ever bought that's like, a pricey card. And I just love the card. And I think going to Mask of Pouncing Lynx when we had all the bonds made sense, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that the deck got worse with 6 bonds and Pouncing Lynx, right? Because obviously armor is a lot more efficient now than it used to be, and decks are a lot more efficient. The power level of the game is generally higher. However, again, Mask of Momentum, it forces that interaction from your opponent that Lynx does not, especially bonds restrict post-bond restriction. Gosh, can't talk. So going back to that Mask of Momentum style gameplay along with the different presenting combo lines, like yes, technically the raw numbers are less than they are with like a traditional old school bonds list. But I do think, I think a lot of Flesh and Blood players just don't really take into the account of like what, not all, a good amount, don't take into account like how certain play lines and certain things affect the opponent's decision making and wears them down mentally, right? It's so difficult in certain situations to consistently make those correct decisions. And I think Mask of Momentum combined with different play lines really helps that. The other thing that's kind of changed with Katsu is Breeze Drivers for Snapdragon Scalers. This is another kind of mini thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the hero. It used to be like originally it was just Breeze Rider Boots. We got in Crucible War and a lot of the Turtle Katsu lists ran it. And then we switched to Snapdragon Scalers where we saw even bigger than that builds. We saw Snatch builds where Snaps was used a lot more. With the bonds restriction, I think that Snapdragon Scalers now comes back into the fold when it comes to, just overall efficiency, being able to give certain things go again. Like Breezer Boots just doesn't really get that crazy value it used to. And honestly, with the lack of bonds that we have now, sometimes you just need to give something go again. Like you can't wait to see if it hits. So I do think Snapdragon Scalers might end up coming back into the fold as like the mainstay piece. And then we have Razor Reflex versus Art of War. This is the most controversial one. I've always been a Razor Reflex biased player. Everyone who's watched more than 5 of my Katsu videos knows that. However, I want to be able to kind of talk about these two cards a little bit more, because there's a case for both of them. There was a time right when bonds came out where people were running like a couple top 8 battle hardened lists. One that won battle hard, I think in Brazil, if I remember correctly, was running like 2 Razors and 2 Art of Wars, or like 2 Art of Wars, 1 Razor, so to speak. So you could run both. But I do think Razor Reflex, especially if you're running like Snapdragon Scalers and you're going back to like this old school Katsu build, I do think Razor might end up being a better play. Now, if you're running still like Ancestral Harmony with 600 wins and Spinning Wheel Kick, and then you're running 3 Descendant, 3 Whelming, stuff like that, then Art of War might be the better play, to be honest. But it all depends on what style list you're running. Me personally, I'm actually running it even bigger than that list right now, which I'm going to show in my next video because I've been really working on it. And to be able to do these different play lines, both with even bigger than that's Quicken Token and Razor Reflex giving stuff go again, you can really trip up your opponent and really honestly punish them heavily for just kind of trying to cheat blocks into you. So that's kind of where that is. But yeah, overall, I think Katsu's, I wanted to make this video, like the core point of this video, and I kind of talked about it at the beginning, was I think bonds took away, honestly, Katsu's biggest strength to me, which was like giving your opponent so many different decision points, and not just like the same decision point over and over of bonds, but like actually like visibly seeing different cards on the mat, and like understanding like, oh, I saw Surging Strike last turn, now I'm seeing a leg tap, then this turn I'm seeing a head jab, then this turn I'm seeing take the tempo, whatever the case may be, right? Torrent tempo. It allows you to really throw your opponent off and prevent them from getting any type of mental rhythm. Whereas before in bonds, it was kind of like they were just waiting to get comboed, or they were trying to see how many bonds you had in your grave, what could be in your hand. And once you play against that enough, you can kind of get a decent feel of when and when not to block. Obviously, if you draw natty, like the natural combo line, you draw it, and there's not much you can do as an opponent in that situation. But overall, I think the new age version of Katsu with all the bonds, in all honesty, even though it had a higher ceiling, I don't know if it was necessarily just better because of the lack of decision making it put on the opponent. Like, especially when you have decks like Zen and Phi, which already do better numbers anyway. They just do. You kind of want to go back of why are you playing Katsu? And whenever anyone asks me like, why should I play Katsu over another ninja other than, just loving it, I think the one thing that Katsu does that Zen and Phi don't do is it asks the question a little bit more to your opponent, and it can force your opponent to make a grave mistake a lot faster than, or not a lot faster, a lot more consistently than like a Zen or a Phi. And I think that's very beneficial, especially like not all of us are calling level top 8 players. If you're playing at PQ or you're playing through Swiss, like those mistakes that players are making are even more frequent, right? When you're playing the Michael Hamiltons, the Burry Spurlocks of the world, sure, like their mistakes might be lesser, but they still make them. Whereas, in your normal rounds, like I think that strength can really lend to doing well. So hopefully it's made some type of sense. I just kind of wanted to come on and talk about it. I wanted to kind of give like a podcast style feel. I'm going to go over a deck tech next video tomorrow at the time you're watching this, and kind of talk about where I am and why I'm doing certain things, but even bigger than that. I think it's really cool. I'm really excited about it. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you want me to go in depth on something else, I'd love to hear, your all's thoughts. I don't want to make content just to make it, but I do want to like talk about things that are just going in my head as a player. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching this. If you like this type of content, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. If not me, it's totally fine. Go to my Twitter down below. My pinned tweet has a link to a bunch of content creators, and not just like YouTubers, but like, you know, people who make art and cosplayers and altar makers and stuff like that. If you have anybody that you know that's not on that list that makes consistent content of some form, article writers, whatever it may be, like, let me know and I'll definitely add them. But yeah, thank you all so much. You all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see y'all next time.